The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 8:47 a.m., and it came from an account that didn't exist. I know that sounds impossible. I know how it reads, like the preamble to some contrived horror fiction. But I'm telling you this because you need to understand that sometimes the most terrifying moments in life announce themselves with complete mundanity. They don't arrive with thunder or darkness. They arrive in Helvetica font on a white background, in an Outlook notification that pings softly on your corporate laptop while you're halfway through your first cup of coffee. My name is David Mercer. I'm a senior data analyst at Northbridge Financial Solutions, a mid-sized investment firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've worked there for 7 years. I have a corner office on the 14th floor, a 401k that I'm moderately proud of, and a standing invite to the Friday happy hours that I sometimes actually attend. I say this not to seem important. I'm not particularly, but to establish that I'm a functional person. I have a job. I have a routine. I have a reputation as someone who is reliable, competent, and decidedly unspectacular. Which is why the email bothered me. The subject line read, "You need to check the Meridian account. Something is very wrong." It came from j.palmer@northbridge.financial. The problem was that there was no J. Palmer at Northbridge. I was certain of it. In my 7 years, I'd worked with nearly everyone in the firm. I knew the analysts, the accountants, the associates, the junior officers. I attended the company holiday party. I'd been part of 3 departmental restructurings. There had never been anyone with the last name Palmer at this company. I stared at the email for a long time. My office was quiet that morning. Most people didn't arrive until 9, and it was only 8:47. The early morning light was falling through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind my desk, casting long shadows across the beige carpet and the scatter of financial reports that had accumulated on my workspace. Outside, Charlotte was waking up. I could see the traffic building on Trade Street below, the distant glint of the Hearst Tower. I read the email again. "You need to check the Meridian account. Something is very wrong." No signature. No pleasantries. Just that single sentence, written in a plain, direct tone that somehow conveyed a sense of urgency even through the flat medium of email. The Meridian account. I knew that account. Everyone at Northbridge knew that account. It was our largest institutional portfolio, $450 million in assets managed primarily by Richard Dalton, our VP of Investment Management. Meridian Capital Group had been our client for almost 15 years. They were a private equity firm based in New York, and their account generated something in the neighborhood of $7 million in annual fees for Northbridge. Richard treated the Meridian account the way a jeweler treats a Fabergé egg. He personally reviewed every transaction. He scheduled monthly briefings. He flew up to New York 4 times a year to have dinner with their CEO. Something was wrong with Meridian, it would be catastrophic. I minimized the email and opened our client portal, typing in my credentials with fingers that I tried not to notice were shaking slightly. The portal loaded. It always took a moment, and in that moment I became aware of how quiet the office was. How alone I was. The Meridian account overview appeared on my screen. I scrolled through the holdings, the positions, the transaction history. Everything looked exactly as it should. The portfolio composition was identical to what I'd seen in the last update from Friday. The asset allocation was consistent. The performance metrics were in line with their targets. I found nothing wrong. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. Who was J. Palmer? And how did they get an email account? I pulled up the company directory, a .pdf file that IT updated quarterly. I searched for Palmer. No results. I searched for J. Palmer. Nothing. I searched for just J, in case it was a middle initial. I scrolled through the entire employee list manually, reading every name. No Palmer. No J. Palmer. No account that could have sent that email. The rational part of my brain, the part that had helped me navigate 7 years of corporate life without incident, suggested the most obvious explanation. Someone had spoofed the email address. It was possible, though I had to admit I didn't know the technical details. But spoofing an internal company email address? That seemed like it would require access to our servers, didn't it? I called IT. "This is Marcus," a voice answered. Marcus was one of our IT guys. Young, competent, the kind of tech support person who always seemed mildly disappointed that he had to explain things to people who didn't understand computers as well as he did. "Hey Marcus, it's David Mercer from Analytics. I got a weird email this morning, and I want to check if it's legitimate or if it might be spoofed." "Email from who?" Marcus said. I could hear the click of keys in the background. "Someone named J. Palmer at Northbridge.Financial." There was a pause. "There's no J. Palmer at Northbridge," Marcus said. "That's what I thought. Could someone have spoofed it?" "Theoretically," Marcus said in the tone of someone who was about to explain something tedious. "But spoofing an internal address from outside the network? That's difficult. Our mail servers have DMARC-enabled, SPF records, DKIM authentication. Any email spoofing an internal address would get flagged and probably rejected. The fact that it got through to you means it either came from inside our network, or it came from a very sophisticated spoofing attempt." I didn't like the sound of either option. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "See where it came from?" "I can try," Marcus said. "Send me the full headers. But just so you know, if this came from inside our network, that's a bigger security issue." "What was the email about?" I told him. Marcus made a small sound, something between a sigh and a grunt. "The Meridian account," he said. "Yeah, Richard Dalton would not be happy if anything happened to that account. Let me look into this. Forward me the email." I did, and then I sat at my desk, waiting. It was 8:52 a.m. The office was still mostly empty. I could hear the elevator ding somewhere down the hall, someone arriving early. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, which I recognized as a sign that I was more anxious than I'd initially admitted to myself. Why was I anxious? It was just an email. But the simplicity of it was what troubled me. The directness, the clarity of purpose. Someone had gone to the trouble of either spoofing an account or creating a fake employee profile to send me a message specifically about the Meridian account. And they'd done it early in the morning before most of the office was awake, before anyone would notice. That suggested intention. That suggested someone knew something. At 9:15 a.m. my phone rang. It was Marcus from IT. "Okay, so this is weird," he said, and his tone had changed from mildly irritated tech guy to something more concerned. I pulled the headers from that email. It came from inside our network. It originated from a terminal in the building. My stomach did something unpleasant. "What terminal?" I asked. "That's where it gets weird," Marcus said. "It came from conference room 7B. And according to our access logs, conference room 7B didn't have anyone signed into it at 8:47 a.m. The room was locked. No one was supposed to be in there. Richard Dalton's office was on the 15th floor, a floor above me, and I had to take the elevator to reach it. I waited for an elevator alone, watching the numbers climb, and tried to think through what I was about to do. Going to Richard felt like the right move. He was the account manager for Meridian. Something was wrong with that account, he needed to know. And if the email was a prank or a security issue, he needed to know that too. What I was not going to do was admit that I'd already called IT and discovered that the email came from a locked conference room. That detail felt like something that would make me sound paranoid. Richard was on a call when I arrived at his office. His secretary, Patricia, who had worked there longer than I had, waved me in with a gesture that suggested he'd be free in a moment. I sat in one of the chairs across from his desk and tried to look like I wasn't in a state of low-level panic. Richard was the kind of man who had aged well. He was in his late 50s, with the kind of tan you get from expensive vacations, and his suit, which I was sure cost more than my entire wardrobe, fit him perfectly. He was laughing at something someone said over the phone. "Yeah, tell Marcus I'll call him back." "Okay, thanks." He hung up and turned to me with what I recognized as his listening to subordinates expression, attentive but with an undercurrent of impatience. "David, what can I do for you?" I closed the office door behind me. Richard's expression shifted slightly, as if closing a door in his presence was an unusual enough action to warrant recalibration. "I got an email this morning," I said, sitting back down, "from someone claiming to be J. Palmer at our company domain. The email said I needed to check the Meridian account because something was very wrong." Richard went very still. "A Palmer?" he said. "We don't have a Palmer." No, I agreed. We don't. And you came to me instead of going to, who would you normally go to? Compliance. This was a good question. I realized that I had come directly to Richard without thinking through the protocol. My instinct had been to talk to him first. The instinct of someone trying to warn a friend before the hammer came down. The email seemed important, I said. I wanted to tell you immediately. And I wanted to check the Meridian account first, to make sure everything was okay. And? Everything looks fine, I said. All the holdings are consistent. The transactions are normal. There's nothing unusual. Richard leaned back in his chair. Behind him, through his larger windows, Charlotte spread out beneath us. I could see all the way to the airport. I want you to do something for me, Richard said quietly. Don't mention this email to anyone. Not to IT, not to compliance, not to anyone in the firm. Are we clear? I already called IT, I admitted. I wanted to know if it was spoofed. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. What did they say? That it came from inside the building. From conference room 7B. At 8:47 this morning. But the room was locked and empty. Richard stood up and walked to his window. He stood there for a long time without speaking. I could see his reflection in the glass. A man looking out at his city, his company, his carefully constructed world, with the expression of someone watching something crumble. Don't talk to anyone, he said finally. Not IT, not compliance, not anyone. If anyone asks about an email or anything unusual, you tell me first. Understand? Richard, what's going on? He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I didn't have a name for. Fear, yes, but something else too. Recognition. As if he'd been expecting something and had just gotten confirmation that his expectations were correct. I'll explain, he said. But not here. Not now. Tonight. There's a bar called Mather's Social Gathering on Tryon. 8 o'clock. Don't mention this to anyone. Don't send any emails about it. Don't tell your wife or your friends or your therapist. Understand? I understood. The rest of the day was strange in a way that I couldn't quite articulate. The office continued on as normal. People arrived, attended meetings, worked on their portfolios, sent their emails, had their conversations. But I existed in a bubble of wrongness, separated from all of it by the knowledge of that impossible email. At lunch, I went back to conference room 7B. It was on the 4th floor, near the back of the building, adjacent to the break room. A perfectly normal conference room, glass walls, a long table, 8 chairs, a flat-screen monitor for presentations. Nothing unusual. No signs of disturbance or forced entry. The lock was a standard card reader. I tried the door and it was locked as it should be. I stood there looking at it for several minutes, trying to understand how someone could send an email from a locked room that was empty. At 2 p.m. I received another email. This one came from j.palmer@northbridge.financial as well. The subject line was, check the Meridian account again. Look at the transaction history from 6 months ago. My hands trembled as I opened our client portal and navigated to Meridian's transaction history. 6 months ago would have been late June. I scrolled through the transactions from that period, looking for anything unusual, anything that might warrant a warning. And I found it. It was small. So small that I almost missed it. A transfer of $47,000 from the Meridian account to a shell company based in the Cayman Islands, listed as administrative fees, and attributed to an account manager whose name I didn't recognize. The transaction had been approved and processed. It sat there in the history like a single wrong note in a symphony. Except it shouldn't have been approved. Transactions over a certain amount require sign-off from multiple people. This should have had signatures from at least 2 account managers and the controller. I pulled up the approval records. And there, in the digital signature field, was the name James Palmer. A name that did not exist in our employee records. A name that had no profile, no office, no email address, except for the one that was now sending me emails from a locked room. Someone had created a fake employee account. Someone had used that account to move money out of our largest client's portfolio. And someone, or perhaps the system itself, which didn't seem possible, was now sending me warnings about it. I didn't call IT this time. I didn't tell Richard. I sat at my desk and read and reread the transaction records, trying to make the impossible seem possible. The transaction had occurred on June 22nd at 3:15 in the afternoon. It had been routed through our London office, which meant it had been processed during the time that Richard and most of our senior staff were in New York for a client meeting. It was the kind of transaction that would barely register during a busy day. $47,000 was a rounding error in a $450 million portfolio. But it was money that didn't belong where it had been sent. I did something that I probably shouldn't have done. I accessed the personnel database, something I shouldn't have had access to, but our security was surprisingly lax for a financial institution, and looked for any record of a James Palmer. I searched the archive files, the inactive employee lists, the terminated employees. There was a James Palmer. The file was from 14 years ago. He had been hired as a junior analyst in our Charlotte office. He had worked here for 3 years. He had been terminated in 2010 for improper conduct regarding client accounts. There was a single sentence in the termination notes. Employee demonstrated unauthorized access to privileged accounts and was found to have created false transaction records. The file had been sealed by compliance and legal. I stared at the information for a very long time. James Palmer had been fired 14 years ago for the exact kind of thing that someone was currently doing using his name. And now someone, or something, was sending me emails using his name, warning me about transactions that he himself had apparently authorized. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. At 5:30 p.m., as people were beginning to pack up and leave for the day, my phone rang. It was Marcus from IT. "Hey David, about that email this morning," he said. "I've been digging into it and this is going to sound crazy." "Tell me," I said. We pulled the full logs from conference room 7B. The terminal in that room is a standard desktop connected to our network. According to the logs, it accessed the email system at 8:46 a.m., about a minute before the email was sent. But here's the thing. The card reader for that room shows no access during that time. The room was empty. Locked. No one came in. So the email couldn't have been sent from there, I said. Right. Except it was. The IP address, the timestamp, everything traces back to that terminal. But no one was there to send it. And David? The account that sent it? It doesn't exist in our Active Directory. It's like someone created a user profile outside of our normal processes and used it to send mail. But that shouldn't be possible. That shouldn't be possible. I could hear the stress in Marcus's voice. He was good at his job, but this was beyond anything in his normal experience. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Marcus said. "I'm going to have to escalate this to our security team and probably our corporate counsel. This is a data security breach. If someone got into our system enough to create a fake account and send emails from our domain, they got in deep. Really deep. And that terminal in conference room 7B? I want to have it checked by a specialist. David, if this is a breach, it could be." "Don't say anything to anyone yet," I said, surprising myself. "Not until I talk to Richard." "Richard," Marcus said. "Why would Richard?" "Just wait, please, until tomorrow." I hung up before he could ask more questions. Mather's Social Gathering was the kind of bar that had probably been nice when it was built in the 1920s and had been deliberately maintained to look that way ever since. Dark wood, brass fixtures, leather booths, the smell of old money and old whiskey. It was the kind of place where Charlotte's quieter, powerful people went to drink without being bothered. I saw no one I recognized. Richard was already there when I arrived at 8 p.m., sitting in a booth in the back, a whiskey in front of him that was already mostly empty. He gestured for me to sit across from him. "You look terrible," he said. "I feel worse than I look," I replied. A server appeared and I ordered the same whiskey Richard was drinking. The bar was quiet, just the murmur of a few distant conversations and the soft clink of glasses. "The email you received," Richard said, "is the third one. There have been 2 others over the past 8 months. The first one came to my direct line. It said that money was being siphoned from client accounts. The second one came to my assistant. Said the same thing. Both emails came from accounts that didn't exist. Both emails mentioned transactions that I couldn't find in our system at first. I waited for him to continue. I didn't report them, he said. That was probably wrong, but I didn't. I was scared. David, I was scared out of my mind. Because I found the transactions, and when I looked into them, I found more. And when I looked into the accounts that authorized them, I found James Palmer. James Palmer, I said. Who was fired 14 years ago. Richard looked at me sharply. You found him in the files already. Just now, I said. IT traced the email to a conference room. I started digging. Richard nodded slowly. James Palmer was my colleague when we were both junior analysts. We came up together. We were friends, actually. We would grab lunch together. He was smart, really smart. Creative with portfolio structures. But he had a problem. He liked money more than he liked rules. My drink arrived. I took a sip and waited. He started moving small amounts of money out of client accounts, Richard continued. Tiny amounts, things that wouldn't show up unless you were looking for them. He'd create fake transaction records to cover it. He was making good money, he didn't need to steal. That was what confused me. But after he was fired, after he disappeared, I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, I said. It wasn't, Richard agreed. About 8 months ago, money started moving out of Meridian. 50,000 here, 30,000 there. Routed through shell companies in the Caymans and the British Virgin Islands. And every transaction was authorized by James Palmer. But James Palmer doesn't work here anymore, I said. No, Richard said. He doesn't. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the bar continued its quiet business. Have you told anyone? I asked. No one, Richard said. And I want to keep it that way. Because if this gets out, if word gets back to Meridian, they will pull their account. We'll lose $7 million a year in fees. The firm will lose prestige and trust. It could bring down Northbridge. And I care about this firm. I've dedicated my entire life to it. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Richard, someone is stealing from our clients. I know, he said quietly. And you're not reporting it. Not yet, Richard said. Because I want to understand it first. I want to know what's happening before I blow the whistle and destroy everything. What is happening? I asked. How is someone using a fired employee's name to steal money? How is someone sending emails from accounts that don't exist, from rooms that are locked and empty? Richard looked at me directly. I don't know, he said. And that's what terrifies me. The next morning, I received another email. This time, it came at 6:47 a.m. before I even arrived at the office. I read it on my phone while lying in bed. From j.palmer@northbridge.financial subject. You need to look at the employee files. Look for the gaps. Employee files. I didn't have direct access to personnel files. That was HR's domain. But I had an idea of who might. I called Marcus from IT as soon as I arrived at my office. The building was quiet around me. Few people came in before 7:30 a.m. I need you to do something, I said. And I need you not to question it. David, I've already escalated the security breach too. Don't, I said. Please. Just listen. I need you to access the personnel database and look for gaps. Deleted files. Employees who were terminated but whose records might be incomplete or missing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Why would I do that? Marcus asked. Because someone is trying to tell us something, I said. And I think the answer to what's happening is in those gaps. I heard Marcus breathe out slowly. You know this is a security breach, right? Formal protocols require. I know, I said. But I'm asking you anyway. Please. Another pause. Then, okay. Give me 20 minutes. I waited in my office, staring at my monitor, at the email from an impossible account. Looking for gaps. What gaps? Marcus called me back exactly 20 minutes later. Okay, this is definitely strange, he said. I was looking through the personnel database like you asked. Most of our terminations have complete files. Termination letters, reference checks, exit interviews, everything. But there are 4 employees who have been terminated over the past 15 years who have incomplete files. significant gaps. One of them is James Palmer. But the others are also strange. Tell me, I said. There's Patricia Henderson, terminated in 2009. There's Michael Chong, terminated in 2014. There's Susan Reeves, terminated in 2012. And there's James Palmer, terminated in 2010. All four of them have the same thing in common. Their termination documents are there, but their original hire files are missing, or damaged, or sealed by legal. It's like someone went back through the system and tried to erase parts of their records. What if they didn't leave? I said. What if they're still here somehow? That doesn't make sense, Marcus said. The building has access controls. You can't just stay somewhere you don't work. Your badge wouldn't scan. What if their badges still worked? I said. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. If their badges still worked, that would mean someone in HR or security didn't properly deactivate their access when they were terminated. But that's a massive oversight. That shouldn't be possible. Check, I said. Check the access logs. See if any of those four names have scanned their badges into the building in the past year. I heard the rapid click of a keyboard. Okay, this is... Marcus's voice trailed off. Oh my God. What? James Palmer's badge scanned at 6:47 a.m. this morning. Conference room 7B. Door 4 to 23, which is the back stairwell on the 3rd floor. And Michael Chang's badge scanned at the same time. Same location. The room tilted slightly. That's not possible, I whispered. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. I hung up and immediately called Richard. He didn't answer. I called again. Still no answer. I stood up and walked toward the elevators, my heart hammering in my chest. The 15th floor was empty when I arrived. It was only 7:15 a.m. Richard's office was dark. I went to Patricia's desk, his secretary, and found a note. Called in sick today. I called Richard's personal cell number. It went to voicemail. I was standing outside his office trying to decide what to do next, when Marcus appeared from the elevator. We need to talk, he said. And we need to involve security. David, something is very wrong with this system. The access logs for those four employees show they've been in and out of this building for months. Years in some cases. Patricia Henderson has scanned in 132 times in the past year alone. Michael Chong 87 times. And James Palmer, his badge has been scanned 7 times in the past month. Doing what? I said. What could they be doing here? I don't know, Marcus said. But I know they're not supposed to be here. And I know we need to call the police. We called security first. Security called the police. By 8:30 a.m., there were 2 Charlotte police officers in our building, walking the floors, checking the conference rooms, trying to understand what they were dealing with. They checked conference room 7B. It was empty. Nothing unusual. No signs of disturbance. Has anyone reported seeing people who don't work here? One of the officers, a woman named Detective Reynolds, asked. We said no. No one had reported anything. Employees might not notice, Reynolds said. If these people used to work here, they'd know the building, the routines. They could probably move through and not attract attention. Especially early in the morning or late at night when it's less crowded. But why would they be here? What could they possibly be doing? By mid-morning, Richard had still not arrived and no one could reach him. His wife answered his home phone and said he'd left that morning for work as usual. She hadn't heard from him since. That's when the police made the decision to file a missing person report and call Northbridge's CEO. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The CEO arrived. Compliance was looped in. Our corporate counsel called. The police widened their search, accessing security footage from the building's cameras, which actually showed something very unsettling. James Palmer's image, clear as day, walking through our building at 3:15 in the morning the previous night. But his image was strange. It was glitchy, pixelated in places as if the camera was malfunctioning. And when security tried to zoom in to get a better look at his face, the image corrupted completely. The same thing happened with footage of Michael Chong. Patricia Henderson's footage showed her walking through the 2nd floor at 2:30 a.m., but when she walked past a window you could see right through her, as if she wasn't fully there. This could be a hoax, one of the officers suggested. Digital manipulation of the footage. But it didn't feel like a hoax. It felt like something that had no name yet, something that didn't fit into any category of crime we understood. By 2 p.m., police were searching the entire building. They found something in the basement in an old storage room that was supposed to be locked. A makeshift office. A desk with computer equipment. Files scattered across a table. Files with our clients' names on them. Files with transaction records. Files with information about account structures and access points. And there, pinned to the wall above the desk, was a photograph. It was James Palmer, Michael Chong, Patricia Henderson, and Susan Reeves. They were standing together, smiling in what looked like our cafeteria circa 2008. And written above the photograph in red marker, large and angry, "They took everything." Richard turned up that evening at his home in Myers Park. His wife found him in the garage. He was alive, which was the first good thing. But he was catatonic, unresponsive, unable to speak, unable to move on his own. An ambulance was called. He was taken to Presbyterian Hospital and admitted to the psychiatric ward. When he eventually regained the ability to communicate 3 days later, his account of what happened was fragmented and deeply disturbing. He said he'd gone to his office that morning expecting to find nothing unusual. Instead, he found James Palmer waiting for him. Or something that looked like James Palmer. Palmer as he'd been 14 years ago, young and sharp-faced, dressed in the same suit he'd worn the day he was fired. "He was sitting in my chair," Richard told the police officer who interviewed him from his hospital bed, "though I was only told about this later. Just sitting there. And he didn't look surprised to see me. He looked like he'd been waiting for me." According to Richard, Palmer had told him the truth about what had happened 14 years ago. Palmer, Chong, Henderson, and Reeves had been working together to siphon money from client accounts. They'd almost gotten away with it. They might have gotten away with it, but Reeves had gotten paranoid and made a mistake. She'd moved too much money too quickly, and it had triggered an audit. All 4 of them had been discovered, and all 4 had been fired. But here's where it got strange. According to Richard, Palmer had said that Reeves had made a choice the night after her termination. A choice that the others hadn't made. She'd taken pills. Enough to end things. And when she died, when her consciousness or her essence or whatever part of a person survives, when that had left her body, something had happened. She hadn't moved on. She'd stayed. Palmer described it as a kind of fragmentation. A splitting. The people they'd been before, their original selves, had dispersed. But the desire remained. The anger remained. The need to be made whole remained. And somehow in the years since, they'd learned how to cohere again. How to manifest. How to access the systems they'd known in life. Reeves, who had checked herself out of the hospital before anyone realized she was missing, had figured it out first. She'd learned how to push electricity through computers, how to manipulate data at the moment of its creation. The others had followed. And together they'd been planning something. Something that Richard had almost agreed to help them with. "They wanted me to help them access the main transaction server," Richard told the police. "They wanted me to give them the master access codes. They said if I did, they could transfer everything. All of our clients' assets. Billions of dollars. They said they would split it with me. They said I could be rich. Actually rich beyond what I already had." "And you said no?" the officer asked. Richard was quiet for a long time. "I said I needed to think about it," he admitted. "That's what I said. I told them I needed to think about it, and then I tried to leave. And I don't remember what happened after that. I remember being in the basement. I remember seeing them around me. I remember Patricia, she was Patricia, I swear to God she was Patricia, reaching out toward me, and her hand was cold, so cold, and it felt like it was draining something from me, and I screamed and I kept screaming, and then I was in my car and I drove home, and I don't know how I got here or what happened in between." The police expanded their investigation. They looked for Michael Chong and Patricia Henderson. They found no bodies, no new deaths in the hospital records, nothing that would explain 4 additional fatalities coinciding with the terminations. But they also found something interesting in old records. A Susan Reeves had been found dead in her apartment in 2012, not 2012, the year she'd been fired, but actually 3 years later. She'd been dead for several days before being discovered. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but there were notes in the police file from the officer who'd found her. He'd written, "Strange appearance to the deceased. Discoloration in a pattern I've never seen before. Almost like electrical burns but faint. Almost like the body had been used as a conduit for something." That file had been closed and forgotten. As for the money that had been stolen from Meridian, IT found that it had been transferred 14 times through different shell companies before ending up in an account that belonged to Susan Reeves, who was technically still alive in the system. The account had not been touched since 2012. There was $847,000 sitting in that account, accruing interest, waiting for someone to claim it. No one ever did. Northbridge kept the scandal quiet. The CEO made a personal call to the CEO of Meridian Capital Group. The stolen funds were returned from Northbridge's insurance. A cover story was prepared about a disgruntled former employee who had hacked into the system remotely. The firm's reputation, while slightly damaged, remained intact. Richard took early retirement. I heard he and his wife moved to Costa Rica. I never saw him again. As for me, I stayed at Northbridge. Life returned to normal, or something approximating it. The investigation was closed. The files were sealed. New security protocols were put in place. Marcus from IT was promoted to head of cybersecurity. The firm thrived. We even acquired a smaller competitor that fall, which expanded our client base significantly. Life moved on, but not entirely. 3 months after Richard left, I received an email in my personal account. Not my work email. My personal Gmail address, which I'd never given to anyone at the firm. It was from j.palmer@northbridge.financial. The subject line read, "David, we need to talk." I stared at that email for a very long time. I didn't open it. I didn't respond. I deleted it immediately and cleared my trash folder. The next day it appeared again. Same subject. Same sender. Deleted and cleared again. It came back the next day. On the 4th day I opened it. The message was brief. "David, you've been helpful. We haven't forgotten. Check the Charleston account. Check it carefully. JP." The Charleston account was one of my personal accounts. I was the primary analyst. No one had mentioned anything unusual about it to me. But my hands shook as I logged into the client portal and pulled up the most recent transactions. Everything looked fine. Perfectly fine. Exactly as it should be. But then I opened the detailed transaction report from the past month and I saw it. A transfer of $73,000 to an offshore account, authorized by account manager David Mercer, routed through the London office. Marked as administrative fees. I had never authorized that transaction. I had never even seen that transaction before that moment. I checked my digital signature in the approval system. My biometric signature was there. My authorization code. Everything that proved it had been me. Except it hadn't been me. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello, David." It was a woman's voice, but strange, layered, as if multiple people were speaking through the same mouth. "We told you we wouldn't forget." "Who is this?" I demanded, though I already knew. "Patricia," the voice said. "Patricia Henderson. Do you remember me? You saw my photograph. You know what we became. What do you want?" My voice sounded very far away. "We want you to understand," Patricia said. "We want you to understand what it was like. To have everything taken from us. To be accused and fired and blacklisted. To have no future, no hope, no way forward. We want you to understand what it feels like to be erased." "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "No," Patricia agreed. "But you work for the same company that did. You benefit from the same system that destroyed us. And now you're complicit in covering it up. You're helping them keep the secret. That makes you part of it." The line went dead. I called Marcus immediately. I told him everything, about the email in my personal account, about the transfer, about the voice on the phone. For the first time since this nightmare started, I was going to tell the truth. I was going to go to compliance, to corporate counsel, to the authorities. "David," Marcus said quietly, "they're not going to believe you." "Why not?" Because I checked the system, Marcus said. That transfer you're seeing? It's not real. I mean, it appears in the system, but it's not real. It exists only in the viewing layer. If I try to pull the actual transaction records, it's not there. If I look at the bank statements, it's not there. It's like a ghost transaction. It only appears when you look at it from certain angles, from certain access points. It's designed so that only you would see it. The cold feeling intensified. Why would they do that? I think, Marcus said slowly, they're trying to make you look like you're embezzling, or losing your mind. I think they're trying to discredit you. Or maybe they're trying to get you to confess to something you didn't do. David, I think they're punishing you for not helping them. They asked Richard for help and he said no. Now they're making his life hell. And they're asking you for help by implication. Do you understand? I did understand. Over the next week, more fake transfers appeared in my personal accounts. 50,000 here. 120,000 there. All routed to shell companies. All authorized by me. All ghosts that only I could see when I logged in. I didn't report them. I didn't tell anyone. I just watched them accumulate. On the 8th day, I received another email from j.palmer@northbridge.financial. Subject, final offer. David, we've shown you what we can do. We can make it look like you're stealing. We can ruin your reputation, your career, your life. We can make sure that every financial institution in the country knows your name as a thief. All of this is within our power now. Or you can help us. We only need one thing, the master access codes for the main transaction server. Richard refused. We don't want to hurt you the way we're going to hurt him. Give us the codes and we'll make the transfer stop. Your record will be clean. Your life will continue. You'll be wealthy beyond measure and no one will ever know. All you have to do is say yes. James Palmer. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at that email, and I realized the terrible position I was in. If I reported the fake transfers, they would launch an investigation into my accounts. The transfers were designed to look real, to look deliberate. Even if Marcus could eventually prove they were false, there would be questions, suspicions, doubt. My career at Northbridge would be over. Other firms wouldn't touch me. But if I gave them the codes, I would be complicit. I would be facilitating the theft of potentially billions of dollars from our clients. I would be a criminal whether or not anyone ever found out. There was no winning move. There was only the choice between two different kinds of destruction. I called Richard. He was in Costa Rica in a small town on the Pacific coast, living in a house with white walls and a red tile roof. When he answered, his voice sounded better than it had in the hospital, but only marginally. Richard, it's David Mercer. There was a long pause. I wondered when they would contact you, Richard said quietly. You knew they would? I asked incredulously. I knew they would try, Richard said. I knew they couldn't let it rest. David, listen to me. You cannot give them those codes. You understand that, right? You cannot. They're fabricating evidence, I said. They're making it look like I'm stealing. They're going to destroy me. I know, Richard said. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't report this when I should have. I'm sorry that I tried to contain it, tried to keep it quiet, tried to protect the firm instead of protecting people. And I'm sorry that now you're suffering the consequences of my cowardice. So what do? I asked desperately. Richard was quiet for a very long time. You tell the truth, he said finally. You go to the authorities and you tell them everything. Not to Northbridge Compliance or Corporate Counsel. To the FBI. Tell them about the emails, the fake accounts, the manifestations in the building, all of it. Tell them about James Palmer and the others. And you tell them that I was offered a bribe to help them access the main servers. They'll think we're both insane, I said. Probably, Richard agreed. But at least the truth will be documented. At least there will be a record. Because David, I think something very dark is happening, and I think if we don't do something, it's going to spread. These entities, these ghosts or demons or whatever they are, they're not going to stop. They're not going to be satisfied with money. They're going to keep growing, keep manifesting, keep pulling others into this. How do you know that? I asked. Because that's what happens when you open a door that should stay closed, Richard said. You let something in. And once it's in, it grows. I made the call to the FBI the next morning. The investigation that followed was one of the strangest and most thorough that Charlotte had ever seen. Federal agents descended on Northbridge with warrants and subpoenas. They interviewed everyone, every employee, every client, every contractor who had ever had access to our systems. They found the storage room in the basement where the makeshift office had been set up. They found the computer equipment. They found the files with the detailed transaction records. They found evidence that the fake employee accounts had accessed our system at least 200 times over the course of 3 years. What they couldn't find was any evidence of how it had been done. How had a dead woman managed to manipulate electrical systems? How had people who no longer existed found a way to manifest in our building? How had they created accounts that bypassed every security protocol and only showed up in the logs if you knew to look for them? The FBI's working theory, which they explained to me in a quiet interview room at their Charlotte field office, was that there had been a conspiracy. They believed that James Palmer and Michael Chong had never actually been terminated, that their termination documents had been falsified as part of an elaborate long-term theft scheme. They believed that Susan Reeves had been a willing participant who had faked her death. Patricia Henderson was still unaccounted for, though they believed she might be using an assumed name somewhere in the country. What about the manifestations? I asked. The images and the security footage? The voice on the phone that sounded like it was multiple people speaking at once. The agent, a woman named Sarah Chin who had been assigned to the case, exchanged a look with her partner. We're still investigating those elements, she said carefully. Video can be doctored. Phone systems can be spoofed. We're pursuing all reasonable explanations. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe her own explanation. She'd heard something in my voice that told her I believed what I was saying. And believing me meant accepting that something unreasonable had occurred. The case remained open for 8 months. In that time, there were no more emails from J. Palmer at Northbridge.Financial. The fake transfers stopped appearing in my accounts. The building was quiet. No more footsteps in the night. No more impossible badges scanning through locked doors. It was as if, once the authorities had been notified, the manifestations had ceased. Northbridge conducted a comprehensive security audit. New protocols were put in place. New encryption. New monitoring systems. The firm actually emerged from the scandal stronger, more secure, more trusted by its clients. Life returned to normal. But I never felt truly normal again. It's been 5 years since those emails started arriving. I'm still at Northbridge. I was cleared of all suspicion. Eventually, when the investigation concluded that the transfers in my accounts were fraudulent and that I had been the intended victim of an elaborate frame-up scheme. My reputation has recovered. I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Data Analysis 2 years ago. I have an even larger office now and a better view of the city. I'm fine. Everything is fine. But on quiet mornings when I arrive at the office early and the building is mostly empty, I sometimes walk past Conference Room 7B. It's still there exactly as it always was. Glass walls, long table, 8 chairs. Sometimes I stand outside and look through the glass at the empty room and I remember. 3 weeks ago, I received an email on my personal account again. Not from J. Palmer at Northbridge.Financial. The address was different. It was from M. Chong at Northbridge.Financial. The subject line was, "David, this is Michael. We wanted you to know that we're still here. We're still waiting. And when the time is right, we're going to try again." I didn't report it. I didn't tell Marcus or anyone else. I simply read it and then I deleted it and then I went to work and pretended that everything was normal. Because that's what you do when you're complicit. That's what you do when you've chosen your survival over everyone else's. You pretend. You move forward. You collect your paychecks and attend your meetings and live your life as if the darkness you've glimpsed doesn't exist. But it does exist. It's waiting. And sometimes, late at night, in the quiet of my apartment, I think about Richard in his house in Costa Rica, and I wonder if he's happy. I wonder if he's found peace. Or if, like me, he lies awake listening for the sound of something that shouldn't exist, moving through the walls of his safe place, patient and implacable. Last week, I was in the London office for a conference. Our London office, which handles many of our international transactions. I was walking past one of the back offices late one evening when I saw her. Patricia Henderson, standing at a computer terminal, her fingers moving across the keyboard, her back to me. She was translucent like looking through smoke. But she was there. She was real. Or real enough. She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge me. She just kept typing and I could see the data flowing across her screen, transaction records, account numbers, routing codes, building a map of how to steal everything. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. Because what could I say? What could I do? They're already here. They've always been here. They're waiting in the spaces between the code, in the gaps between the transactions, in the margins of our carefully organized financial systems. They're patient. They have nothing but time. And eventually, when the right moment comes, when our defenses slip or our vigilance wavers, they're going to ask again for help. And I'm terrified, absolutely terrified, of what I'll say when they do. Because I already know that there are limits to what I'm willing to sacrifice for my own safety. I already know that there will come a moment when the choice becomes not between my ruin and complicity, but between the ruin of everything and everyone or giving them what they want. And in that moment, I'm not sure I'll be strong enough to say no. The email from Michael Chang sits in my deleted folder, and I can't bring myself to permanently delete it. I read it sometimes late at night, trying to understand what they want, what they're planning, how this ends. The last line of the email is the one that haunts me most. You're one of us now, David. You've always been one of us. We're all just trying to survive in a system that wants to destroy us. Maybe it's time you stopped fighting that and started accepting it. And the worst part is, I'm not sure he's wrong. The worst part is, I'm beginning to understand.